all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time is our marvelous model maker. Say hi, marvelous model maker.
Hi.
Jesse, thank you so much for joining me. This is so exciting. So much incredible work that you have done. But obviously, we're starting with the thing that's most important. What is in the water at Ithaca College that causes all of this?
Great question. Yeah, we do have a little bit of a mafia going. We really stick together and you can't escape us. That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of waterfalls nearby. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, the beauty of waterfalls. I don't know. It's so exciting. You're a model maker for Dimension 20. If people didn't know that already, they did because it's in all the descriptions that I put for things. And you've been with them since Never After, right?
Yep.
And we're going to wait on Never After because obviously, and I'm going to through the magic of editing, make this come together seamlessly. It probably won't be seamless, but it'll be close. You've been with D20, I think, since Never After, which makes Never After, Ravening War, Dungeons and Drag Queens, and then obviously Bros End junior year. I don't know if you caught the thing that I said was we'll talk about Never After in a bit because obviously there are things to talk about with Never After. How did you come to Dimension 20 though? I assume it is through your Ithaca College connections.
That is such a great question, actually. It's kind of wild. I was watching Dimension 20 before I ever started working for them. One of my very near and dear friends from Ithaca College was really into Critical Role, D20, all that stuff, and we started playing D&D and started watching it together, and we were living together in New York. And I reconnected with Casey within a week of me moving to New York City. They're like, you want a job? Let's go to Hershey Park and work on a silly little gig down in Pennsylvania. And I was like, all right, sure. And we were catching up, we were chit-chatting, and I was like, I haven't seen you since before the pandemic. How are you? What's going on? And we're catching up, and then they're like, oh yeah, what are you doing right now? Oh, I work for this silly little D&D show. And I was like, what silly little D&D show? So Casey got me a job my first week in New York. We reconnected at a silly little set dressing job in Hershey, Pennsylvania, at Hershey Park. And I found out they were working as an art director for Dimension 20, and I said, shut the fuck up. That's wild. The few times I have watched this show, I've been like, God, I want to model make on that show. Because Casey, Raven, and I were all friends in different years at Ithaca College who studied set design, and we're all very passionate about miniature making. And so Casey was also wild that I knew the show because they hadn't met anyone who would recognize the show at that point. So they were like, you know this show? That's wild. And so we connected over that and then worked a lot together in New York. And then came the spring. Casey's like, hey, just throwing a feeler out there to me and Raven, we might need some model makers on this silly little island off the coast of Washington for a month or two, if you're down. But Casey was like, this is also just feeling the waters, seeing if you're interested and if you want to. We don't know by any means if this is going to happen, but this is loosely what we're talking about and just want to see if you're at all interested before I hard pitch this or whatever. And Raven and I immediately kind of looked at each other and we went, yeah, we're not accepting work anymore. We are so hopeful to do this miniature making job. We just stopped accepting work in New York, which is really stressful as a freelancer, being are we going to be leaving this side of the country and model making on a small island? Who knows? But we are now keeping that space open. I found a friend to sublet my place before it was ever really official because I was just gotta jump in head first. And so then I was a week before we were supposed to maybe drive across the country, it was confirmed that we'd be working out there. So we all the three of us piled into a car and drove across the country, and thus began our journey with Dimension 20.
It's amazing. Yeah, you're now one of the residents of Lopez Island. You and Raven
Yes.
seem to have made delightful but strange little home out there. as we got to see in the legendary Rick Perry,
Yeah.
as you're building a place to live.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is sort of that process like? Of what is Lopez Island like in terms of model making, and I mean, I guess everything else kind of out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely place. It's probably one of my favorite places I've ever lived here in the US. It's just really beautiful, very rural. And I mean, the nicest thing about it is like I'm so close to my job when I'm there. I just walk down a little hill and I'm ready to model build. But there's something really lovely about having, I mean, it's hard to find creative work or like fabrication work outside of cities. So having the opportunity to go to an island in the Pacific Northwest, which is somewhere I've always wanted to be, and work a job I've always wanted to do is just a dream come true. It's amazing. And yeah, going there, it was like within the first couple days, we hit the ground running with like putting together an outdoor kitchen, but also we had just started working on the first cotton candy auction. So I was taking all the photos of all the miniatures from that with my iPhone I'm filming on right now. Just kind of wild. And so, you know, we were working 10, 12-hour days on the weekdays. And then it was so light, so late there that like Raven and I would often like run out and meet second work was over and try to chase the sunset and like just hang out along the coast. And it was just like so idyllic. It was a lot of hard work too, because it was like mainly just, you know, when Casey was there for a little bit, for a couple weeks, and then left to come down to LA for filming stuff, and Raven and I stayed on the island, and it was mainly just us until Shane Brockway came along, and now he's just one of my best friends. But yeah, we were all on the island together working and fabricating, but it's a lot of work for just like 3 model makers and painters. To do a whole board or two, a couple of boards up there was like really gratifying and really like happy to do. But like you do need, if you want them done faster, you just need more hands. But I deeply loved my time working on Lopez, and like whenever there is work out there, I'm like, Rick, please call me. I will drive the 20 hours to be there because now I live in LA, and I no longer live in New York, and I have a car, which it's not a bad drive along the coast. So, and now Raven lives in Lopez Island, so that's even more in push for me to like go where my best friend is. So,
yeah,
but yeah, it's a delightful thing, and like we're definitely like very close with Rick and like friends and like, but also like coworkers, and you know, I interact with his kids a lot, who are lovely, a delight, and his wife is
cutest.
amazing. Yeah. Oh my god, they're so cute. I could talk about them all day. But yeah, I just it's a really different environment than working in LA at the end of the day. I do love the shop in LA, and I love my coworkers, but I do love being a little bit more one with nature, and like the ability to just like run away to a cliffside and see some seals while drinking some like cider made on the island is just a really lovely like way to end a work day.
Oh, that sounds magical. Yeah, it's always it's very funny always because like I'll see, you know, like you and Raven and Rick posting like Instagram stuff from LA, and I'm like, oh, Dimension 20's about to shoot again because like everybody's in LA. Like there's not like it's not there's and I might even like I'll make a comment about it, like there's no I don't have insider information. It's just everyone who's on Lopez Island usually is in LA, which means they're shooting. Like it's yeah, it's so cool. I love that, you know, Rick has sort of built this weird little place to like have weird model making. Yeah, I'm curious, you know, like obviously like you, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I believe you started off in like theater production.
Yeah.
And I've talked to KC about this, that sort of the similarities between like, because especially because you have to make minis for that so that you know like the set that you're building really like helps to inform. Have you also found that to be true, that like it's very informative in terms of like building models?
Absolutely. It's a very different style of model making than model making for like film and TV and gaming. Because like I was just working again on a theater model recently for an old professor of mine. And it's just like so much paper and layering, and like it takes like a lot, like there's not as much kit bashing. It's like you kind of are completely making something from scratch in a lot of ways, which is a lot of fun. But it did like, it was a really great like formative phase of like learning how to build in different scales and like how to get dimension out of different materials. And so like each because I've also done a few architectural models, and like I did a gingerbread house. That was more personal, but like learning a lot from like using different materials, and like different techniques and styles of, it's just so wild how different it can be and how varied it can be, and like how many different styles and techniques and products you can use. Because like theater, it's a lot of paper and foam and carving and like layering paper to give dimension. And then here, like there's a lot of like polystyrene, and there's a lot of like, there is a lot more foam carving and a lot of like kit bashing. So it's taking multiple different pieces and like making them work together, which is a lot of fun, and like fun to be creative in these different ways, like using the tools instead of like making something from scratch, which can be a lot of fun, is definitely a lot more time consuming. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It doesn't matter. You did, but also okay. I don't. Yeah. But I guess, I mean, so obviously like your start to that all was in New York, and we've had quite the New York announcement this week of Dimension 20 coming to Madison Square Garden. Will you also be in attendance? Because it sounds like a lot of folks are going to be in attendance.
I don't know. I mean, I learned what everyone else learned, that they were going to New York. I think they're doing it in January, yeah?
January, yes.
Yeah. So I unfortunately have so many weddings to go to on the East Coast this fall. I don't know if I'll be able to make it out for the whole event, but it's very cool. I'm shocked and amazed that they're doing it at Madison Square Garden. That's incredible. That's just like, it shows how much the show has been growing and how many people really do genuinely love and want to see them perform. And it's exciting because they don't do this very often. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll be in attendance, unfortunately. But if I do happen to be in New York, which I try to go back as much as I can afford, I would definitely try to go.
Yeah. I have a theory that there's going to be minis there because like Rick has said that he'll be there, like that kind of thing, where you're like, but if Rick's going to be there, I mean, I'm sure it would be fun to just see the show at Madison Square Garden, but that feels like he's working the show. Yeah. So who knows? Keep your calendar clear is what I'm saying.
My calendar's always open.
Yeah. And then we can say hi in person because I bought tickets today. Good God, was it a nightmare? Ticketmaster is such a villainous corporation, but that's a whole other topic. We'll go through, like I said, we talked about the seasons that you've worked on. I said we're coming back to Never After because I have specific questions about Never After. You can probably guess what they are. But Ravening War, what's it like building like realistic fruit for a battle set that is like scaled correctly, right? Like it was like the actual size of an orange, but like in terms of the rest of it is like massively huge because it's like an orange that is 10 times the size of the humans in the combat.
I mean, it was so exciting to work on Ravening War because Crown of Candy was my personal favorite season of Dimension 20. So when Rick announced, and I also have watched Critical Role, so when Rick told us like we're going to be doing a prequel to Crown of Candy and Matt Mercer's going to be DMing, I was like, I want to make so many fucked up little food guys. I want to do that so bad. And I had to be so chill, and I wasn't really chill about it because I was just like, God, what a cool, fun universe. Like, how often do you get to bake, like, I don't know, landscapes out of food? That's so fun. It was actually really interesting because I learned a lot about like how to cast and make molds in this process. And so we used a lot of the similar molds from Crown of Candy before. We have a whole box of just like different foods, and like they made a lot of castings of like just food that they had around. So a lot of those foods that you do see are cast from the real thing, and we spent a lot of time like casting them and then cutting off the mold lines, sanding them down, cutting them to where we want them to be, laying them out, and then we paint everything to look as realistic as we can. It was very fun. It is kind of just an exciting process to go through because I'm like, when Rick was like, yeah, I want like orange hills and mountains, I was like, are you gonna like stack up like lots of oranges? And like seeing kind of like when it goes from like the verbal communication to like, yeah, some rough sketches and like research images to like seeing what it actually becomes is like a really exciting process, especially in a world such as that.
Yeah, it's really cool that like because most of the people I've talked to, well, I mean, I guess I was gonna say most of the people I've talked to like didn't watch the show prior to working for it.
Yeah.
I guess Shane didn't really have an option because he started as the show started.
Yeah.
But like it's really cool that you, being such a huge fan of A Crown of Candy, got to come into Ravening War and build just such iconic, especially like, the battle that's on your website specifically. I mean, Deus Pazul might be a more memorable combat because of the like the technical aspects of it, but the most upsetting combat for sure, the one that you worked on, because we got to see tragedy that we knew was coming.
Yeah. Yeah, that was wild.
What was it like as a Crown of Candy fan, like getting the note of like, hey, you're going to work on this horrific event in the history that we've referenced?
It was so exciting. Yeah, it was like, oh wow, I'm like excited to see how people react to it, and I'm excited to see like what exactly is pulled. So like, the moment of like in the watermelon carriage where they kill Pamela Rex, I believe her name was. I think Lou kills his old character's mom.
Yep.
Like, that's fucked up, and I love that. It was so fun to like just be a part of like that storytelling process, and like to work on a show that you're like, I really deeply enjoyed watching a couple years ago, like seeing it come to life again in a new and interesting way of like, I just never thought I personally never thought they'd do another Crown of Candy. So hearing that they were gonna do a prequel, I was like, well, that's fantastic. That's amazing. Yeah, just very exciting. I was really gung-ho about it. And I mean, I've been really gung-ho about every season I've worked on. They've all been so different and unique and fun and like challenging in their own ways. But yeah, Crown of Candy was very like, I was very excited to work on that.
Yeah. I know we started talking originally because I hit, prominence is not the right word, but it's the only word I can think of, during Burrow's End, where I was just started reaching out to literally everyone, and just like, you want to talk about Polly the Bear? And I know you had much less of a hand on that and much more on the neutral board for that season. But also like the neutral board was so stunning, incorporated all of that light and like the blue and everything that like you got to like build, as well as from what I have heard from Shane, an absolute nightmare amount of trees that you had to make. What was neutral board building like for Burrow's End?
It's always so interesting to like work so much on the DM screen and the neutral board, because they're the pieces that are out the most, but you never really get a lot of like good zoom. Like sometimes you do get like with Fantasy High junior year, like they're getting like really good up close shots of the DM screen especially, but it is interesting because it is something that they see but they don't really interact with ever, but like it gets so much screen time but not like up close zoom in time, so it's like fun to like kind of see like, oh, what can you see from the screen, and like what's really noticeable about each piece, and like what is the neutral board adding to the story overall? Like, what is this place to like the DM screen and neutral board for Stoats was really fun because I mean, it was just, they tied in together so well, I think aesthetically, and like kind of got this really like, cold feeling from both. But yeah, working on the neutral boards, it's really it's like one of the first things that we do is like start working on the DM screen and the neutral board because they need to be done first typically. And I mean, what's that like? It's exciting. It kind of sets like, I feel like sets the tone for like how it's the rest of the season's gonna feel like aesthetically in a lot of cases. And I think it definitely did that with Stoats. And it was just cool to like work in a like to carve out all those like river pathways and knowing that like they were gonna be lit up and like putting out, there was a lot of trees. There were a lot of trees. I'm like, now it's been so long. I'm like trying to remember. I'm like, that was a year ago. What were we doing? What was I feeling?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a year ago that you're building any of these things at this point. Like we're it's such a huge lead up from when recording I mean, literally like you're building, then recording happens, and then like 8 months of like editing and whatnot. The DM screen, especially Burrow's End, had that like, I gave you all the hints, Mr. Policeman vibes to it, because like there were all the things that we're in plain sight of like, here's the nuclear building.
Yeah.
But everyone is going to see it for every moment that Abria is talking, but we can't have people solve that mystery.
Yeah.
Like episode 1. It's such an interesting concept in problem to have to work around. But yeah, I mean, Burrow's End is such a magical season. But now we're fully into the next magical season of junior year. And it's so good. Looking at your website, did you make Squeam? Are you responsible for our favorite recurring character who definitely was not a new bit? What was the order down? Did you know what was happening when you made Squeam, or was it just like, hey, make a mini that's rocks?
Sometimes, so a lot. It really depends. Like things will just get thrown on my table. Like Rick will come down and be like, we need this done, and like I'll get a lot of research images for certain characters, or like vibe images. Like we'll print out some things, I'll like paste them up on the wall in front of me and like use that as reference. But with Squeam, I got a 3D print, and Rick was like, it's gonna be a crystal guy, and I was like, cool. He was like, blue crystal guy, maybe some like red lights, like pink eyes, and I was like, that sounds great. And so I started painting him, and I was like, so what is this deal? And like, sometimes Rick will give me like a vibe check of each character. He's like, it's just a new bit I finally made along the way. We don't know who he is, but he just says Squeam. And I'm like, that's fantastic. People are going to love that. So it was really exciting to paint him. And I also painted, oh my gosh, it's so hard to remember everyone's name, but the centaur.
Balthazar? Is Balthazar?
No, Balthazar was
the cowboy?
Yeah.
Yes.
The cowboy.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm not going to get it.
I'm not going to get it either. Tragedy. Yeah. But yeah, so like, being handed all these little things at first, and like some loose sketches or like research images. Yeah, so Squeam was 3D printed by someone, handed off to me. I did some like Tamiya, like a spray on it, and then dry brush and some eyes, and he was so much fun.
Yeah,
I was really cool, and I had no idea how much he would like almost immediately blow up.
Yeah,
I think what I've learned is that I've been really lucky, and I've painted a lot of the more meme characters, or characters that become memes, and
yes.
I think they just love a stupid little guy, and I love painting
a stupid little guy. Yeah. Look, we know that's true. You said you were taking pictures for the Crown of Candy auction. A cake with stripy pants is worth $11,000. So we love a stupid guy. Also, shout out to Fig for knocking Kelroy out of first place.
That was crazy.
Wild.
Yeah, but I sent a screenshot to Rick and Raven, and I was like, we broke a record. That's amazing. Yeah, it's just so wild. Very exciting.
And for such a good cause. Like, what it makes you, sometimes you feel good to be fans of things, and that was definitely one of them.
I mean, it's not often you feel good to work for a company that gives back in such a way. Like, I got to work on that auction. I went back up to Washington to help with it, and, took all the photos for that as well, and like sanded and like bonded and did everything for the things with Raven, and to like work and see that like, oh, my work is helping someone in some way as an artist, like actually helping some people in some like real way besides like inspiring or moving. That like what an incredible feeling. And I feel really, really lucky to have gotten involved with Dimension 20 with work the way that I did.
It was fun. So I was at PAX East when that final week of the auction was happening, and so I was walking around basically the convention floor, like watching that Fig mini, being like, is it gonna break? Is it gonna break the 11,000? Like, is it gonna? And then like immediately like recorded a video to like talk about it, like in the convention, just trying to find like a quiet place in the convention, because it's very like the first time like I gained any level of like popularity was during the Crown of Candy auction, because I was posting videos like being like, here's the new numbers, and people were like, this is amazing, and I was like, oh, if people want me to talk about Dropout and Dimension 20 more, I will do that.
I do remember seeing those videos. They came up on my feed, and I remember like eventually when you started becoming more of a reporter, I started learning things about the company through you, and I was like, oh, how cool, merch drop. Or like there was one day where I was like, Raven, have you heard of this guy Jordan? And she was like, yeah, I know who that is. And like we all talked about you in the shop once. It was like, oh boy, it was like
that's so like, bizarre.
What a fun thing.
It's for a long time I was like, no one knows who I am, and I think everyone knows who I am now at this point. It's very weird. But but yeah, the auctions were so cool. It's very fun to watch. I don't know if you ever saw, like, I do a bit where I bid on something,
Yeah.
like when it first drops, so that I can like take a screenshot that I'm like the high bidder on
Yeah.
something, and then obviously like I don't have thousands of dollars to spend on minis, so like I can spend $50 on a fake bid, like immediately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Squeam is so funny. Like, I can't wait for Squeam to go up for auction. Although I will say, I am never good at figuring out what riches will spend their money on.
Nope.
Yeah, like
Me too.
because I didn't want to talk about this yet, but I guess we have to. The Orange Fairy
Yeah.
auction. Everyone, myself included, were like, it's going to go for $100,000. And then it went for just a little bit more than what all the other fairies went for.
Yeah, it was wild. I guess you really have no idea like what people feel an emotional attachment to.
Yeah.
Like personally, like I don't know. If I had money,
Right.
what would I buy? I don't know. But like, yeah, it's kind of crazy because I had like sometimes I look at like the Reddit page or the Discord page and I'm like, everyone's like, that orange fairy's gonna go for a lot just because like Lou Wilson put the thing in his mouth and
Yeah.
you know, it turned into such a big bit. But yeah, it was interesting to like be like, oh, okay. There's no rhyme or reason to some of these things. But yeah, also wild because like a lot of people are like, you excited to see your work go for so much? And I'm like, I don't know. That feels really weird.
Yeah.
But very cool at the same time.
Speaking of, yeah.
Yeah.
You got it. Let's get
Orange Fairy by Jesse Harron.
Wow.
Great.
Thank you, Jesse.
I'm clapping for Jesse.
Jesse Harron.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Jesse Orange Fairy by Jesse Harron.
Jesse.
Yeah.
Walk me through it. How's that feel?
It was wild. So I was when my last day of Never After, like working on that season, was on the island. I was leaving the very next day. We were just kind of like rushing to get a lot of things done. Rick dropped a bunch of unpainted minis on my table, and he was like, the fairies are the priority. Here's a name for each one of them and the color that they're associated with. Figure out which is which. So, you know, I was looking at each fairy, and I was like, yeah, I think this one's going to be the green fairy. And I think she has the blue vibes, and she has the orange vibes, or whatever. And I was like, and this red one, she's a little too sexy, so she's going to be red. And so, you know, Rick approved, like, what colors I had picked for each fairy. And I started painting them, and the first fully mini figure I'd ever painted was the red fairy, followed up by the orange fairy, and then the green fairy, blue fairy, yellow fairy, so on. And I did that all in one day, but my last day working for Never After, and I was in a rush because I think I was flying to Europe to run a marathon, so I was like really in a different headspace, ready to leave, but also like wanting to do a good job, and then finished it, put them away, and I was like, well, goodbye. And I was in Germany when Casey texted me being like, dude, they chanted your name. I was the day before running my first marathon. I was like, what are you talking about? And they were like, that sexy fairy you painted. And I said, the red one? And they were like, no, I think it was orange. And I was like, what fairy are you talking about? And that was like a confusion thing. And I was like, I gotta go. I'm stressed. And then like later when I was back on the island, like 2 months later, Rick was just like, man, they gave you the coolest call out. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, they chanted your name. And I was like, oh, okay. Why? And they were like, oh, the sexy fairy. And I was like, which sexy fairy are you talking? It was such a blur. I don't really remember. And so it was just very funny to like, they were like, yeah, just wait until it comes out. And so I remember I looked back and like looked at the photos and I was like, oh, okay. So it was the orange fairy. And I was like, huh, interesting that they all gravitated towards that one. And I understand now is definitely the hat. The hat was hysterical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The solution of these fairies are too sexy, so let's tone down the sex appeal by adding a funny little hat. I think that upped it. I think that way upped the appeal. But yeah, so I think the after party that dropped, or the adventuring party that dropped, was like
The episode title, 3 Cheers for Jesse Harron.
Well, yeah, I didn't know that was coming. I saw the orange fairy, the fairy in the orange top hat, and I was like, oh, this must be it. And we watched it, and I was like, oh, they must have cut it out. Like, oh, whatever. Like, that's cool. And then a week later, Raven, Casey, and I were all FaceTiming, chat. Like, Raven and I were together in Washington, FaceTiming, catching up with Casey, and they were like, oh, check the adventuring party. And I opened it up, and it said 3 Cheers for Jesse Harron, and my hands immediately got so sweaty. I was like, what? To be perceived when you're an art kid in the background, that's wild. So it was very funny, and it was very funny to have my name mispronounced. All of it very hysterical. Yeah, it was wild to. Yeah, I'm just a silly little guy who paints things sometimes, and people seem to appreciate them. And it was fun to have that acknowledgement, but also overwhelming in a way of being I was not prepared.
Yeah.
Though I was warned. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about Dimension 20 is the thing that not necessarily the chanting of the name. That obviously doesn't happen very often. I think just the one time. But the list that Brennan will get of here's everyone that worked on all of the minis. And that Brennan mispronounced your name, and a producer came in to be like, you said it wrong. I want to make sure that when we record that we have the correct pronunciation of a name, which is, I think, very admirable and not typical of most TV, any production.
No. It's really rare. When we started working on Stoats, we started hiring a lot more stop motion animation people who work in model modeling and painting, which they're delightful. I'm obsessed with my coworkers. But when we told them that I think people were double checking how to pronounce certain last names or whatever. They're like, well, they'll do a call out for what work you did, and and they'll give your names, and they're all like, whoa, what? That's kind of crazy, because when you're a behind the scenes person, you kind of get lumped in as art department. So it's cool to have a moment of oh no, these are the artists, and here's how you can follow them. Here's how you can support them in some way. Because all of us are freelancers and contractors, so we don't work full time. So, having other ways of people able to reach out, ask for commissions, or following us, and just even liking our work is a huge deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's also super helpful for people like me, because when Brennan grabs a list, I just grab my phone and I start typing names into it, and I'm like, all right, now to go find all of them on Instagram. But also, I love that it is more even just than here's the art department. It's literally all right, Raven Bartlett did this, Jesse Harron did this. It's the thing that jumps out of Kelsey Hunter's responsible for the beating heart. Ash Shimkus is responsible for the liver and other organs. They name what the person did, which is so wonderful and cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously, you get a standing ovation from the Intrepid Heroes twice, so that they get once with the correct name pronunciation is pretty amazing, and just a full adventuring party. Yeah. Watching Lou Wilson put the orange hat into his mouth, what were your thoughts? The same thing of Brennan, of just pure panic that he had actually swallowed it and you needed it for
honestly, I kind of love that. I was like, nice. I was like, did he actually? I was just more did he actually do it? I was like, I think I loved the most of Siobhan being like, I'll Venmo you $20 to do it, and then the immediacy of doing it. Yeah. Hell yeah. I just love the commitment to a bit, and I love that they almost always follow through on those threads.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was funny. I was like, we can probably make another hat or get that hat back somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, I think when I talked to Casey, I think they were in panic of we have to use that for the close-up mini shoot. You can't eat the hat. Oh man, yeah. It's always funny to me when something like Squeam, the Orange Hat Fairy, whatever catches on to the Intrepid Heroes, and they just latch onto it for absolutely no reason. of just like an instant like, no, this is the thing we're doing. I will say like,
Oh,
oh,
sorry.
go,
I was like,
no,
I was just
please
gonna
go
say,
ahead. Yeah.
shocking when I was like, I've been really bad about watching all the seasons I worked on because it's a little weird to watch your work. I'm like, weird. I remember making that, but I have been keeping up with Junior Year because I think I'm like very proud of like the work we all did on that season. So I've been like screenshotting things for my website that I'm trying to revamp. It's in working process. But it was really funny to see them latch on to like Connor Counterspell.
Yeah.
Just like the silliest little bro wizard that I had to paint and like kit bash to look buff, and then like I was like, that's the wizard you're gonna gravitate to? Not the lion wizard, not the centaur wizard. That's crazy. Nope. I love they just love a stupid little guy.
Yeah, they really do. Yeah, shout out to Julia Stark who drew Connor Counterspell.
Yeah,
Colin,
I saw that.
whichever. So good. It made me laugh so hard. Just like the fan art exists for him.
I've been tagged in some fan art, and I've also been tagged in like one cosplay of the Orange Fairy, and I was like, that's incredible. I was like, that's so wild.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, I mean, you made a bunch of really cool minis this season. You got to make Baby, which everyone loves. It's very exciting. Our first like look at Baby as a mini since he wasn't in season 1, and season 2 obviously had no minis. I do. I'm trying not to hit to the Baron part yet. We're going there, obviously. But Squeam. Well, one of the funny things about Squeam, is it was. I don't know if I said this before we started recording that sometimes I get episodes early, and so just for that clarity, in case I did say it before we started recording, I got that episode early, and so I was watching it by myself. And Squeam started. And I, like, as it turns out, a lot of people on the internet were like, did I forget like a pretty significant character? What's happening? And so like I pause the episode, I open up a new tab, and I'm like, Dimension 20, Squeam, search, no results. Okay, this is a bit, because no universe does like a Dimension 20 character exist that doesn't have like a wiki for it. But yeah, it's so funny to see their commitment to like a stupid little guy fall in love with, and they're so good at improvising and that thing of just like fooling the audience for so long. I think a lot of people didn't know until the adventuring party the next night when they explained what was happening. All right, Baron. Oh, our favorite little guy.
I love him so much.
Were you both Baron minis, or just like the really nasty many-armed Baron mini?
I painted both minis.
Okay.
So the mini Baron, who's just like, standard Baron, his normal form that we're used to, painted him, and then I loved his little striped shorts. Those were my favorite little things. And then was working on him, and Rick gave me, or Allison, I can't remember who, they gave me it was Allison. She gave me a little bag that was full of just like little arms and little legs and like a mask and like a Baron head, and was like, make the Monster Baron. And I was like, Monster Baron? He's getting worse? What? So they gave me some reference images of like, maybe we want something more like this. And like, I think one of the images I remember out of like the 3 was like Monster No Face when he becomes like very spooky. And I was like, oh, that is really spooky. But what if like, he's a skeletal little lad? What if we just keep him really skeletal like? So I started like blue tacking limbs together and sending photos to Rick, because he's, watching things being done elsewhere, and texting them to him and like, you like this? Is this good? Like, how about this? And then, come give me notes and whatever. And then we like thought it'd be cool to like make it like so like he can trap them inside his body, which were also like, those were minis that I had to paint that strained my eyes for a week. But so I got to like hodgepodge together a bunch of limbs and make this wonderful, delightful little freak. And he's probably one of my top 5 favorites things that I've done for the show, just because like he's so beloved. And
yeah, I think 'cause I talked to Sarah Barrios. I think Baron is her favorite NPC because she loves a weird little guy. Um, uh, I talked to Allison and she sent me a picture. I'm sure you've seen it of like the like Baron like taking pictures of the minis and like Baron's mini like the number on it was like 1666
Yeah.
or whatever. Like it was like very good. Anyway,
It's really fun.
yeah, so good. I mean, for the sake of the intrepid heroes, very happy the combat ended for them. For the sake of my amusement, hate that it ended then. Hate that Murph rolled a 1 and we didn't get full Nightmare Baron mini.
It hurts. Sometimes you put so much time and effort into something for it, and like that's just that's just showbiz, baby. But it's like, oh, I was so excited. I was like, I can't wait for them to just be eaten by Baron, and like they just got so lucky that episode. Everything. I was like, they're gonna freak, and I'm really happy, like stoked that like they didn't have to go through that stressful combat, but also, man, it would have been so good.
I know.
Been grand. He'll just live on forever in our hearts, which is why I had to post him because I was like, I was so happy that Brennan did take the time to like show him, because him and Lydia for that battle were the two I spent the most on, or the most time on, because Lydia had to have this plaid shirt. Rick was like, she has to have that plaid mom shirt, and I said, okay, it's gonna take me some time, but it'll be fun. And I also spent so much time making those like little mini people that are like, they're truly smaller than the size of my thumbnail. I was like, wow, we got just glances of them. So it was nice that they take the time to show Baron in his true freak form. Yeah.
Yeah. You said top 5. Is there someone that beats Baron in terms of like a mini you love to have that you've loved that you made?
I mean, there's a lot of like little characters you never really see on screen that I'm just like obsessed with. Like I painted Juicy on one mini's butt for the Fairy Folk Festival, or Fair Folk Fest, that one episode. Like sometimes there's so many minis and you have to like differentiate them. And if I have time, like I painted a skull on the back of one of the punk band's jackets, and that's so fun. But in terms of minis, there's a couple coming, I believe, in the Coliseum battle that are very exciting, that I loved working on. And that, I'm sorry, that comes out. Are you sure that comes out today? Just making
absolutely.
Perfect.
Yes. Look, if it doesn't come out today, I won't post this interview on Friday. But yes, like it comes out today, 100%. Because in the adventuring party clip, the map is still out, and Zach is like stamping his forehead with a stamp. I don't know why.
I love that.
But yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of little guys in that episode that are great. I got to paint the tables, and I got to do some like little graffiti on the tables, which I love. Like I did a little rat grinder thing, and like I did R&B and a heart for Risen Baron. Like just like painted a little shrimp. I'm just having so much fun. And then there was one of the monsters in the battle, the raw shrimp dragon, I got to paint, and he's one of my favorite guys. I had so much fun working with them, or painting that guy. And he, like, it's kind of working for the show. You don't get like when I meet a lot of mini painters, they're like, oh yeah, here's this mini I've been working on for like a month, and I'm lucky if I get a day or two to work on like an actual big mini, just because it's so like we've got shows to film, we got a deadline, but I did get to spend like a good day, maybe 2 days painting him, and yeah, it was so much fun, and like I love, like he's a little translucent, you can kind of hold them up to the sun and like see like through him a little bit. That's just so exciting. And then there's also all these things, like it was very funny. Rick was like, I need you to make like one ochre jelly, like we'll make it out of hot glue. It'll be fine. Here's an image of what it looks like. And I was like, okay. So I was like piping this hot glue into like a little ice bath to layer like little layers of glue. And then I was taking a lighter and lighting it to like melt it so it would look more like blobular. But we only had a shitty little like $1 light, like the cheap lighter. And I'm doing it and I'm like melting the edges. I'm trying not to burn the hot glue and giving him little arms and painting him ochre like jelly color. And then I'm like, I looked them up because I'm like, what kind of monster is this? Because like my knowledge, like I love playing D&D and I love D&D, but I'm not an encyclopedia like some people are out here. So I looked them up and I'm like, oh, every time we cut one of these guys, he gets smaller. So it went from like maybe make one to like make 3 big guys to like, oh, we need to make like essentially 18 of them, all of various sizes. So for a day, I was just like making these little ochre jelly monsters and burning the fuck out of my thumb because I only had this shitty little lighter
yeah.
to try to get that like.
They get so hot so fast. Yeah.
It was awful. It was very funny though, and I'm really proud of them because they're just like my little boogers, and I get to like.
Yeah.
I put them on a
Amazing.
little palette, and I was like, "Oh, look at this! Look at all this beautiful array of jellies." But that was a fun battle. I really enjoyed working on, and then other things. I mean, I really enjoyed. We've really brushed on them, but the minis of the NPCs. I had to paint two. Like we do a little bit of sculpting on each one. So Shane Brockway painted all the PCs. I painted a second version of some of them, or like if they like leveled up, I painted them, and I had to like replicate Shane's style, which is so interesting because every minis painter on the show has a very different like little style to painting. So like trying to replicate someone else's like hand in such a small scale can be very tricky. And I also like we didn't know that they would be making more, so Shane didn't really like he used different paints than what we had in the shop because he was working at his home in Virginia. So I was like, I have to color match as well as I can. So I painted I think Adine has a spell where she like duplicates herself, so I got to paint duplicate Adine, which is fun because I'm like, oh, I can tell the difference, but like it's hard to tell like who does like. Shane and I do our eyes just very differently, so that's the real kicker, like figuring out who did what. But then so I had to replicate and like build on top of these like teeny tiny, like truly smaller than my nail. You can see them on my website. Figures that match the PCs so that when they do this nightmare scene with Baron, it was like in this fun, much smaller scale. And I spent like a good 3 or 4 days, like, painting like the thin lines on Kristen's like jumpsuit and like the question mark on the back and like sculpting her hair longer. And doing it in that scale was such a fun challenge while trying to make them look like the real thing. Like Pig's plaid skirt in that scale, and like also still including like the little fishnet stock or like the hairnet stock from Doreen the lunch lady. Painting a little like TB on Riz's briefcase in that scale was a lot of fun. So those, I think I'm like really proud of how those turned out, and really love those a lot. And so I love putting them next to like the big mini and being like, look how small. I'm obsessed. But yeah, I'm trying to think of other things without spoiling, because like some minis I painted thinking that they would come out in earlier battles, and they come out later.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I think did you paint Boggy and Moggy?
Boggy. I did not paint Boggy, but I painted Moggy. Shane Brockway painted Boggy, and he's a delightful little guy. And then there's, I don't know, they talked about how there's also an owl form. So there's also an owl form. Don't know if it'll ever come to play, but I got to paint him as well. Yeah. So it's kind of just fun. It's really exciting to work on junior year because I watched both freshman and sophomore year and know like how many of these characters are just so beloved and like exciting to like see them actually come to miniature form, which they hadn't. A lot of them hadn't in season 1, and obviously not for season 2. It's just so cool to like pull up old character art and be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know who this person is, and like people lose their mind when they see Baby for the first time. Like, what a fun miniature to have out there. Like Lydia Lydia coming out and painting Zane, and like, yeah, it's just like really fun to like work on such beloved characters. Yeah.
This has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much. If folks wanted to see those minis, where can they find you on the internet to see those things?
My Instagram, it's just Jesse Harron. I try to remember to post, and sometimes I forget. And I am constantly trying to update my website, which is just jesseharron.com. And yeah, that's where I try to update it more frequently. So I just updated it for the first time in like 4 years this week. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate it because that meant I got to look at a bunch of minis today as I was doing prep for this. Yeah. So, Jesse, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. So excited for everything tonight and then the rest of junior year. I don't. If you haven't seen, I don't know how to end.
That's so
interviews,
fine.
So
I
I just.
never know how to stop talking. So
Yep. Perfect. Right. I'm gonna hit stop recording.